we've made a lot of great progress as well. So yeah, David and I are here with any questions that council may have on the latest, and certainly can help out where we can.
Thank you. Thank you again, David, for update. Do we have any questions or comments from council? Councilman Melny.
Yeah, thank you. Good presentation, David. I know I've known you for years, and we've talked about this numerous times. In your best guess, I'm not gonna hold you to it, but what are you thinking we'd actually see the end of the tunnel? When could actually, and also why I'm asking that is because we're talking about the Adams property, the Broadmoor area. We have great plans for the city of Pasco to do that, and you don't want a wilderness. Next to some, say, cool hotel or whatever. So, what in your best guess would be when this would actually cross the finish line? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm best guess is I'm hopeful that either by the end of this year or maybe early next year that we'll be in a place with the legislation as well as with our engagement with both of the key tribes where there's comprehensive support, and hopefully we'll had also throughout that time had a chance to have some of those public conversations, public meetings, and that sort of thing as well. And I think that our goal would be to try to get legislation or amendment added to what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA, in the next fiscal year. So the bill would be worked on in spring of next year, about this time next year, hopefully with passage by the end of next calendar year. And I think that's perhaps still maybe a bit of a best case scenario, but that's, I think, a potentially realistic timeline.
Okay, well, I appreciate that answer. And if there's, again, anything the council could do to help out, I know we've all expressed support on this project, and it's something I think is vital to making Pasco a beautiful city. So thank you.
Some really exciting opportunities, I think.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I continue to support this very wholeheartedly. So, like my fellow council member said, if there's anything we can do, please let us know, and so we can jump to it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Thanks again, David, for your presentation.
All right. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Moving on to our next item on the agenda, resolution, Pasco Public Facilities District Interlocal Agreement. And again, Director Recti for a report.
All right, good evening. Another exciting project here. This is with our Public Facilities District and also the district that is putting forth our Aquatic Center. So just a quick brief background. The Public Facilities District was formed on July 15th, 2002 through a city council ordinance. The PFD, at that time we established an interlocal agreement, which was revised in 2013, I believe, most recently. That just sort of governed what the city can do to help out with the PFD and what the PFD's mission is for the community of Pasco. As we are all well aware and very proud of, the PFD board successfully placed on the April 26th ballot just about a year ago, just over a year ago, special election that asked for the 0.2% sales tax, which passed. So the PFD's new mission now is to fund and build the Aquatic Center. The successful outcome of that election has provided us provided the PFD and city staff a lot of additional work and effort in supporting this community amenity. So really the current, let me get caught up here. So at the March, we decided that over the last couple of months was time to reassess the services that the city provided the PFD and to ensure that the city was compensated appropriately. That we were outlining the best services for, public record keeping, financial support, legal support, just general staff support to the PFD board. The additional services includes Public Works now assisting with RFPs and construction management, as well as management of getting the project off the ground and designed, and then certainly additional financial services that have been required and assistance to the PFD as we move forward to obtaining the tax revenue, as they move forward to obtaining the tax revenue. So at the March 2023 meeting, the PFD board approved a new interlocal agreement with the city of Pasco. Just continued, outlined further continued administrative, financial, and legal services for phase one, which is the occupancy of the facility and the project. The interlocal agreement is attached for council review. This has been reviewed and approved by the PFD board. It's been reviewed and vetted through our legal process as well. And this is the item that we're bringing forth to the city council for consideration, as it is the other piece of the interlocal agreement. tonight. So September of 2022, the PFD selected former Mayor Matt Watkins as the PFD Executive Director and Project Manager to oversee the development of the aquatics facility. So he is here this evening to provide any additional information, answer any questions you have. Mainly the financial impact will be the PFD will be supporting the city through what we've estimated to be $9,500 per month. In order to, those revenues can provide, they can be higher depending upon city support of the Public Facilities District, but we felt that the previous compensation of $1,000 a month did not cover the additional staff time and financial effort that it's been taking for this effort. So this new ILA should solidify our relationship moving forward as we move forward to the Aquatic Center project. Matt and I will take any questions of council at this time.
Thank you for
Or
that
did you have-
presentation.
Nope.
Mr. Ferguson, you have a comment?
I do. I just need to just make you aware of a couple things. I'll tell this board, like I told the other board as well. The legal services that we provide are billed, two things. One, legal services are billed separately and are not included in the $9,500 because that fluctuates dramatically. There's months where it's, a couple $100 and there's months where it's several thousand. So that can fluctuate quite a bit. So that's not included. I will say, and like I told the other board as well, 99% of the time there is no there's no conflict between the boards, but as they are a separate municipal corporation, there could be situations where a conflict between my ability to, or our office's ability to represent this council and that board could come in conflict. So this is one of those rare situations where I do need to let the council know that if they would like a legal review of this document, I have reviewed this document generally, but I haven't provided legal advice to the PFD board nor this council's with regard to the actual legality of it. And if that's something that you would like to pursue, I'm certainly happy to put you in touch with somebody who can do that. It's a extremely simple agreement, so there's not a lot there that I think you would need any particular help with, but certainly happy to put you in touch with somebody if that's something that you would feel you need to do.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you for that. Do you have any questions of Mr. Director Rackheit or Mayor Watkins? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you. I've sat through a number of meetings where this has been discussed at length by the PFD board. I feel like it's been well hashed out, well thought out by both city staff and by the PFD board itself. So this is what will help get them continuing to move forward. So I will support this. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? We are in support.
Wonderful to hear, and I would just add just 2 cents is that, as Zach pointed out, this is an evolutionary process, and for the PFD to use the talented staff that, of course, you as a council know is helpful for the PFD, and the mission's very much the same between the PFD and the city in a lot of ways, and to be able to use that talent pool where necessary, and then when we get to the point where we're going to be using some additional talent that is beyond the city, it's a nice combination, and city staff have been incredibly helpful to the PFD and look forward to that relationship in the future, and also support of the council is noted by the PFD very much, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, no more questions or comments. Thank you. Appreciate that. Moving on to our next item on the agenda, item C, ordinance amending Pasco Municipal Code Chapter 25.127, zoning from waterfront development district to mixed use district. And we have Director White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. And Council's heard this issue before, is maybe not quite 2 months ago, but we have Jacob Gonzalez, City's Planning Manager, and Nicole Stickney, representing AHBL, the proponent, the applicant for the code amendment, and they will be giving a very brief presentation and, of course, be available to answer questions.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. The proposal for this code amendment is to amend the existing waterfront development district and to amend it to accommodate a wider variety of mixed-use developments at a citywide level. The waterfront development district was adopted in early 2021, initiated with the Port of Pasco. The objectives of the mixed-use zoning district are to create a compatible balance of commercial and residential and non-residential uses. provide for a diversity of housing options and support for ground floor retail and neighborhood scale development, commercial development, and allow for the densities to support active pedestrian and recreational opportunities. The existing constraints right now are that the current comprehensive plan identifies mixed residential and commercial as a land use. However, we don't have a zoning district to implement that land use. So essentially, we have a significant deficiency in what we have in a policy statement with the land use, but not a zoning code to implement that policy. So I apologize for the typo on the last bullet point, but essentially projects and developers and developments that would like to seek a mixed use type development, whether horizontal or vertical, are limited and constrained by the existing development constraints in the zoning code. So some of the proposed modifications include certainly amending the waterfront development district. The reason why we chose to amend the waterfront development district is because essentially the intents were very similar in nature, with the intended results to be providing a much more diverse development pattern, more density, a variety of uses, again, that compatible balance between residential, non-residential, a mix of parks, pedestrian spaces, et cetera. This amendment does not propose any changes to the regulations created or approved for associated with the waterfront development district. We did have conversations and confirmed with the Port of Pasco that this proposal doesn't interfere with their proposal, but we wanted to amend it. And because we're applying this at a citywide level, it was necessary to provide for the necessary regulatory framework, since this wouldn't be in a site that's constrained where the current waterfront development district is. So a quick overview of what the amendment is proposing. It is proposing some new building design standards, provisions for screening and signage. These are very similar to what's in our existing code, but they're new for this zoning district. And provisions for temporary businesses to allow for pop-up businesses, et cetera, to serve potential customers and residents, et cetera. It does revise existing regulations in the zoning code, but again, only for the use of those the mixed-use zoning district with regards to dimension and design standards, height, landscaping, and certainly accessibility and transportation. And just as an example, the code is proposing for single-family detached dwellings to have a height of 40 feet with attached, those are townhomes, row housing, for example, to be a limit of 45 feet. With multifamily dwelling units with a maximum height of 90 feet. Again, keep in mind there certainly still are the other regulatory constraints that ensure that buildings are done in a compatible way based on their location within the city. Commercial developments would have a height limit of 85 feet. And like any other project in the city of Pasco, increased heights are permitted with a special permit. So that was a really quick presentation. Staff wanted to ensure council that we acknowledge and understand that there's several references in the mixed-use zoning code that reference other elements of the Pasco Municipal Code, pets, for example. Certainly realize that those portions of the PMC may be in store for an update or at least a consideration for modernizing those. But we didn't want this proposal to be held up by changes that may not directly impact it based on those other references. And those references were included so that the residential component of these developments would be considered residential, but overall, this is a non-residential zoning district, keeping in mind that there's a residential component. And that's a little bit contradictory, but similar to what other best practices recommend with mixed-use zoning criteria. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can for you this evening. I do know that we have a representative from AHBL also in attendance that can help answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jacob, for your presentation. Do we have any questions or comments from council? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for your presentation. I raised a number of questions and some concerns at the last time 2 months ago. Have there been any changes to this? I couldn't see any, but it's a lot of information, and our devices are not well set up to do a good comparison of documents.
Yeah, so the only change that was added was directly including parks, recreation, opportunities, and access in the purpose statement of the mixed-use zoning code. As mentioned, I think this code, along with several others that have been proposed, adopted, and along with those that will be continued to be proposed in front of council, I think it's staff intent to continuously refine these over time to make sure that not only that they represent an opportunity to meet current demand, but be sort of future-proofed and adaptable for future development opportunities. And the mixed-use zoning district is certainly no different than that. So I think the concerns that were raised, Councilman Maloney, a few months back in February regarding some of the provisions that reference other elements of the code, I think this is an opportunity for us now to take a look at those other elements and see where those need to be updated, refined, removed, clarified, et cetera.
I appreciate that. The 2 points that I still stick on a little bit as I'm looking at this are the 7 dwelling units per acre for as part of a, in essence, what a mixed-use development, which ends up being fairly low-density residential, given the nature of what else is allowed in this area, and so I'm still, that still seems like a low minimum for what this development is intended to be. And the other point that I'm still a little stuck on is we have a section that's all about recommendations, and I understand the value in providing some additional guidance. However, I'm not sure the value in codifying that additional guidance. If it's not a requirement and it's not prohibition, I'm not sure that code is actually going to provide developers something that, or the city, an ability to do much with that. So could you speak to those 2 points?
Definitely. Regarding the minimum density, the citywide average is roughly around 4 or so units an acre. I think the most dense parts of the city, central Pasco in particular, have an average gross density of roughly 6 units an acre. So we wanted to throw on at least a minimum. We can raise it. The concern might be that it might hinder potential developments that have a non-residential component associated with it. And so we wanted to be kind of careful and offer that flexibility, but staff can certainly come back with a higher threshold for a minimum. It is likely, just based on the requirements associated with the mixed-use zoning code, that it would be fairly difficult to do a 7-unit per acre project. But in the case that it is appropriate and that it meets the rest of the criteria of the code, that would be an option for a project. With regards to the flexibility standards.
Sorry, Mr. Gonzalez, if I can just stick on that point a second there. I apologize, I should have asked my question separately. Okay, you said that this may be difficult to meet that minimum with a mixed-use project. Can you expand on that statement? Because
it was likely with the type of developments that we would see proposing to rezone, because a rezone would be required to use this in the first place, that if they can't achieve that minimum, there's no need for them to use this new zoning classification. Most mixed-use developments, whether they are vertical or horizontal, are going to have much higher minimum densities, or not minimum, average densities, for example, 20, 30, 40 units an acre, because you're talking about much smaller infill projects potentially. We didn't want to have such a high minimum, though, that it would prohibit potentially projects that meet the intent and criteria of the zoning code.
I appreciate that, because I think I'm just going to try interpreting that, because I'm trying to get myself unstuck. So I appreciate your conversation here. What you're saying is that we want to that allows us to have additional flexibility in terms of what we would allow, in terms of what potential projects. I guess I'm still concerned that that seems like a low minimum. So I'd be very interested in understanding if there's a way we can look at that a little harder.
We can definitely address that, and then I might also defer to the project applicant as well on that question. With regards to the flexibility, staff is cognizant about the potential burdensome requirements regarding the aesthetic elements of mixed-use projects. A lot of cities that we've learned from will require specific modulation on a building, articulation of the roof. Every 2 feet you must have a different panel, or every 4 feet your roof must change height. But every 4 feet, that means you're requiring new material, different material potentially. It certainly just adds more and more cost. Staff wanted to provide recommendations for what would be the expectation, but we certainly aren't the best designers or the architects on the city staff, so we wanted to at least let the development community propose projects that would meet the general criteria and intent, at least aesthetically, with the proposed code amendment. And I might defer to the project applicant here with HBL to further address or respond to those questions if that's appropriate.
Absolutely.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nicole Stickney. I'm here with AHBL. We're at 5804 Road 90, Suite H here in Pasco. And my client for this application is Trini Garibay. He is a local developer, and he has some great plans in the city here. So this came about because he came to me and said, this is what I'm looking to do. How can we make this happen? And I said, well, there's a little disconnect right now. We have mixed use land use in the city, but not a zoning district that can be applied citywide. Said, I worked recently with council and they were very enthusiastic to pass a waterfront development district. That happened just a couple of years ago, and I was in front of the council when that occurred. And there was great enthusiasm for it. And so I said, I don't think this is going to be anything too controversial. This should be straightforward. We already have a path or a model to move forward with. And so that's what we did. We didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to integrate these new concepts into the existing code. That's why you see references where we needed to make some specific standards that would be applicable only to this particular zoning district. We did so, but where it would be important for other aspects to default to the broader city code, we didn't want to sort of substitute new regulations for things that are already in existence and you can tune up later. So that's sort of the background for this, and I hope you're excited about it as we are, because we really want to get this off the ground. We applied many months ago. I think my SEPA checklist, I had a September date in it, and I think this has been well vetted. I would say this has been before the Planning Commission with several meetings, workshops, public hearings, been to the council a couple different times, so I hope that you're as excited as we are and motivated to push this forward, because we really do want to see this come to fruition. And as I've mentioned before to this group, there was a disconnect. There is a land use designation called mixed use, but there is no zoning district that can be assigned. So this is a remedy for sort of an inconsistency you have right now between your comprehensive plan and your zoning code. So we want to bring everything into alignment. That helps with compliance with GMA and a number of other matters. As to the questions at hand, let's see if I can get to them now. The first question is about minimum density for residential, and as Jacob said, we were trying to bump it up so that we show a minimum threshold that makes it different than the other zones, so that there's kind of no overlap. But the other thing we wanted to do is not limit things too much. What we want to do is offer some flexibility, and maybe as this code is applied in the city, it can be refined further. Maybe the city would decide later on, 7 isn't a good minimum. We really need to have a higher minimum. But right now, we just feel like this is a comfortable starting point, and it won't, I think it won't discourage people from trying to move into this zoning district. Once you get a rezone, then you're entitled to the new zoning district. Then there's a new set of things you can do and things you can't do. So we want to offer that flexibility, which I think will be handy for developers. In terms of what my client has in mind, it exceeds 7. But anyways, we wanted to bring something to council that everybody would be comfortable with, and usually people aren't asking for more density, so trying to meet the middle ground here. The code as presented may not be perfectly right, but I think it's still right now a good time to pass it. As I said, it can be further refined. The code is a living document, but right now I think this is making leaps and bounds forward in terms of what the city can achieve, and we're anxious to come in with a rezone request. The other question was about...
The question was regarding a series of recommendations.
Oh, yes. Thank you,
Typically,
Councilmember.
city code isn't
Yeah.
full of recommendations. It is full of thou shalt and thou shalt nots.
We debated this quite a bit. Is this something that lawyers would like to see in the code? Probably not. Probably not, to be honest. It's not something that the city would be able to. Certainly, the city would not be able to approve or disapprove a project according to that criteria. That's clear. What's the benefit of having it in the code? Why should it be there? What it can do is really try to provide some direction to developers about how these best practices can be employed with projects. And these could be used by staff to say, okay, they're doing most of these things that are, in the recommendations. That helps us feel more comfortable with this proposal in terms of site plan review or those types of things. It just puts something out there as a bit of a benchmark that, again, you couldn't approve or deny a permit on, but I think it helps move things in the right direction. In time, you might change them, you might get rid of the recommendations, or you might make them requirements. I don't know, but we think it's a good starting point. We think it's still useful in the code. But I'm not going to try to pretend that it's a standard or a benchmark that they'd be held to. It's just something to try to achieve. And we think it's good to include that just in terms of best practices so that it's available for public consumption for developers and for staff when they go through and review and do pre-application meeting and they talk about what can your project have. Council's already considered some of these things. They have these set of recommendations. It's not requirements, but these are some things to think about. That's really the utility of having that.
I appreciate those answers, and I get stuck in the weeds very deeply a lot of the time, but I am super excited about this. And I think when we look at the density, where my mind's at is Olympia is going to enforce density upon all cities.
Yep.
Pasco is not going to be exempted from that. For us to maintain a largest variety of housing options across the city, we're going to have lots of density in some areas. That might be the only thing that gives us an ability to have other flexible options for housing in other areas of the city. So when I'm thinking about minimum density of seven dwelling units, we're still talking about low density residential. And that's where my mind is at, is if we need to have high density in certain areas to allow us to have other options in other portions of the city, that's where where my mind is at on that. Do I want to hold this up for 6 months while we figure this out? I do not. I do not want that. So if it's not something that we can come to if there's not some fairly straightforward ability for us to move from where we are to some other recommendation, I do not want to hold this up on it. I'd rather think about that over time as we continue to refine our code. In terms of recommendations, I just can't think of any other spot in our code that it has recommendations. I mean, I've been through most of our code, if not all of it, and I can't think of any other spot that has recommendations in it. Now, I don't have any issues with the recommendations themselves. I think they're really good recommendations. I do not want to turn them into requirements at this point in time. I think that is an overly burdensome thing to do to our developers. But my thought was, can we not have pamphlets? Can we not have guidance that goes along with it separately? That's what we would do in most of my jobs. Again, I'm not hung up on this to an extent of which I want to delay this out there. But that's where I'm at. So I still not happy with either of those two. What's in front of us here, but not so much that I wouldn't vote to approve it if it was in front of us for approval today.
Yeah, and I might suggest then if it's something that makes a difference between moving forward or not moving forward, perhaps we throw it into a resolution. Maybe it could be promulgated that way, and then there could be a reference to a resolution that can be more easily changed and modified since it is not codified by council, but that would be another way to promulgate some recommendations, and that might kind of take care of the squishy language problem of something that's codified as an ordinance.
I am open to recommendations on how to do that. I'm not interested in holding it up, so take that for exactly what it is. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just thank this council for your support, and I thank staff as well for their support, because I think this is going to be very great for the city.
Thank you. Thank you again for your availability to answer the questions.
Thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Councilman Serrano.
Thanks. I'm going to jump on the train with Mr. Maloney here. I'd like to see those in pamphlets, not necessarily a resolution. It's certainly not the ordinance, where it's not enforceable. It's a recommendation. I think all it does is potentially cause confusion. So I'll leave that at that. My other comment relates to subsection 16, design standards, transportation. Looking at items D and E, that's Delta and Echo. I like that we have this ability to let the CED director make some sort of adjustment, but there's no basis provided. You know, it's block length shall not exceed 600 feet unless no other practical alternative is available as determined by the CED director. I get a little concerned when we have the ability to grant some sort of exemption, but we don't have a particular basis, because we risk both sides of the coin there, right? Either we take too prescriptive, where a developer comes in and says there is no other available alternative, and then we have a CED director who unfortunately is stuck in the position of saying, well, I don't believe you, or, you know, I've reviewed it and I don't see it. Alternatively, we have someone come in and the CED director says, yeah, I'll grant this. And my concern becomes, if we have two different developers that appear that they're not held to the same standard by being denied and granted, it creates a problem, I think. So I don't have a particular approach that I'd prefer, but I do think laying out some type of determination points would be beneficial to the public, not to the public, but to the developing community.
Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, I think there's a relatively simple fix to that. Actually, right below that, under the provisions for cul-de-sacs, we identify specific criteria for which a cul-de-sac would be permitted, and those should be also applied to exceptions to block length or block perimeter, et cetera. So I think we can change that wording a little bit to make sure that when a director or an applicant is reviewing the regulations or the requirements, if there's a giant lake, a mountain, a rail track, et cetera, it is obviously not feasible to meet the criteria, but it is exempt because it meets this specific requirement.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Again, giving folks the most heads up is the wisest approach. Aside from that, then the screening standards you mentioned, that only applies, as I understand, to while developing, or is that a permanent standard? That's subsection 18. And it says all equipment, materials, and goods not housed within the primary structure shall be 100% site obscured fencing, right? My only concern is if that's for permanent, what is this equipment, material, or goods? If I've got a rain can out, that's technically a good. Obviously, we don't want to screen that. So I guess my question is, again, does this only apply to certain materials, goods, etc., and does it only apply during development? Or is this in perpetuity that once somebody's residing in that location, they would have to then screen my kids' bikes?
Okay, so under screening standards versus the applicability statement, the section does not apply.
I think the mic's off, miss. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question, council member. So screening standards, there are three parts to it. The first is applicability, and it says the section does not apply to development at Osprey Point. That's because this is new language. It does say all equipment, material, goods not housed or stored within the primary structure shall be within a 100% site obscuring fence wall or structure, with the exception that outdoor garden sales associated with retail buildings must additionally incorporate false walls and fencing design that match or complement the architectural features of the main building walls. To answer your question, this is not just at the time of construction. This is for the development. And the idea is that businesses sometimes have, really this is oriented towards businesses, and maybe we just need to expand the applicability statement a little bit to say this doesn't apply to residential uses, because you brought up the example of a bike. And we can certainly do that. But the idea is that businesses sometimes have stuff that they keep around that it really isn't part of their retail offerings. Maybe an example I can come up with is I don't know, like a cooler case or storage shed, things like that. Things that they kind of need on the site, but don't belong in the building, don't belong in view either. So it's just a screening requirement for that. And then the last statement here, which I didn't hear you ask about, but I'll still address: gas meters, electric service boxes, and other mechanical equipment shall be screened from public view by a site obscuring fence walls or planting materials. That can be pretty broadly applied, but the idea is that you don't want that to be in view or really obvious. We want these things to blend and so that we're really creating an aesthetically pleasing environment. So that's the intent, and I think that we've achieved that with enough flexibility that can be applied. So my suggestion would be that we, since you've caught this, change the applicability statement to say this applies to retail establishments and does not apply to residential uses.
Yeah, I think that'd be extremely helpful. And then to the point of the meters element, I think insofar as they remain accessible to the meter reader, or I don't know what the proper term for those folks are. I think what I'm concerned about here is I read this, it's so broad that you could have not even an overly ambitious code enforcement, but a moderately ambitious, someone that's kind of poking through, and it's like, well, I don't like seeing that here. And now you have someone dragged into a dispute. So, those are my comments there. And I appreciate the work that's done here. Like Councilman Maloney, I have no interest in holding this up. I just want to make sure that what we do is A, enforceable. So again, I'll hit on the recommendations, prefer them not in the code. And then B, when it's enforceable, it's clearly articulated so that the developing community and the future owning community understand the standards they're held to. So I appreciate the effort, just nitpicking here. So thank you.
No, we appreciate the opportunity for refinement before this goes to final version. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Thank you again for the discussion. All right, moving on to our next item on the agenda, update on housing and transportation efforts. Director White.
I'll just turn it over to Mr. Gonzalez.
Good evening again, Mayor and members of council. Staff wanted to take an opportunity to provide an update, certainly on our efforts related to housing and transportation, but more specifically, implementation of our comprehensive plan, because it's not in the near future. Actually, we will be preparing our next update to the comprehensive plan, which is due June of 2026, which means we need to get started pretty soon. So obviously, planning in Washington State is guided by community vision engagement, certainly with the Washington State Growth Management Act and alignment with our Franklin County countywide planning policies, accommodating in the goals established by the Pasco City Council, and obviously working underneath our own Pasco comprehensive plan. There are several required elements of a comprehensive plan: land use, parks, recreation, capital facilities, etc. Tonight we'll be focusing on the three highlighted elements: housing and transportation, and the implementation of those particular elements. Starting with the housing element, certainly there's a long RCW about what we should be doing with regards to accommodating a variety of housing. And that's lined up certainly with city council goals that were established for 2022 and 23, and long before that as well, regarding quality of life, in particular the completion of our ongoing housing action and implementation plan, and the several initiatives that have been started prior and those that will continue to progress in the near future. So I wanted to try to demonstrate sort of where we're at with regards to implementation, ongoing progress. And so I wanted to break it down based on regulations, funding, and policies, since those are really the three areas that from a staff perspective we can try to address and that are also within our control. So House Bill 1923 was initiated by staff in 2019. That was a legislative incentive to increase residential building capacities, about a 2.5, 3 year effort, but we ended up with a substantially updated and modernized and practical zoning code that essentially reversed decades of restrictive exclusionary zoning practices, and now the opposite. So we now in the city of Pasco allow multiple lot size averaging. We allow multiple units. We encourage more units next to amenities such as parks, schools, public transportation facilities, civic facilities, etc. And we also have a very popular accessory dwelling unit program that's in effect right now, which also has a user's guide that we'll highlight later on in the presentation. We are also, when that amendment was adopted, we mentioned to both the Planning Commission and this body as well that there's going to be a need to refine the zoning code as well. So we initiated a separate effort in early 2022 to do a phase 1 element of a residential design standards, essentially an update to the zoning code. Those zoning code recommendations were recommended by the Planning Commission in November of 2022, and we'll highlight those a little bit later in the presentation. There's been a lot done also regarding the funding of housing and housing affordability at various levels. At the same time we initiated House Bill 1823, we also enacted the House Bill 1406 option, which was a sales and use tax credit that gives the city of Pasco sales tax credit back to us for us to use for the construction, rehabilitation, and procurement of affordable housing, either the units, the site, or including rehabilitation. As of January of 2023, earlier this year, I think we have a little over $300,000 for us. We're waiting for the adoption of the Housing Action Plan to identify some specific strategies on the best way to allocate those funds. Our Community Development Block Grant Coordinator and program is very busy right now, focusing on kind of realigning and focusing the efforts of that program for community development, specifically on housing, particularly on low to moderate areas, a tenant-based rental assistance program, and the funding of rehabilitation projects to keep older housing units in the housing stock, and also the use of ARPA funds to fund affordable rental housing and homelessness. There's also several policy-related efforts that have been completed and are still underway. In 2021, the city of Pasco was one of 5 cities nationally selected to participate in the Furman Center, which is a housing policy institute hosted at New York University, to participate with 4 other communities in a housing solutions workshop. So the city of Pasco and many of our staff from both the Block Grant Program, Economic Development, and the Executive Office participated in a program to help us craft an overall housing policy framework and structure that encouraged multiple housing options, the preservation of affordable housing, responding to the local demands, and sort of future-proofing our housing policies. In 2022, Pasco was one of 9 cities selected to work again with the Furman Center out of New York University and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to begin to identify the relationship between housing policy and health policy. So we just wrapped up that program. It's fairly intensive. We actually partnered and worked with the Benton Franklin Health District and our partners at the Housing Authority of the City of Pasco and Franklin County through that effort, and we look forward to implementing what we learned there in the Housing Action Plan. And just about completed is our work with the Wagner School of Public Policy at New York University. We're working with their graduate program to identify anti-displacement policies and funding of affordable housing and the analysis associated with that. Anti-displacement is now a requirement under the Growth Management Act, and it's also a requirement of the Housing Action and Implementation Plan. So we've been working with a great group of students who have really gotten to learn a lot about Pasco and identify that in Pasco we certainly face our fair share of residents who are at risk of displacement, and what we can do policy-wise, regulatory-wise, et cetera, to either prevent it, deter it, and what ways we can utilize our existing programs, whether it's 1406 or the CDBG efforts, to fund housing affordability in the city. Talked about User's Guide a little bit already this evening, and just wanted to highlight a very popular booklet that we've got circulating around the city right now. And this is a User's Guide that was just completed with the help of AHBL, a local firm, to help residents, property owners, homeowners in the city of Pasco construct accessory dwelling units on their properties. As of January 2022, when this was allowed, we permitted 15 ADUs in the city of Pasco. I think we've got 4 or 5 right now that are pending throughout the permit review process. This is a guide that's available in both Spanish and English on our website. It's become very popular and is a great tool to provide for the community that really takes the cumbersome language of the municipal code and breaks it down into more public-friendly and certainly staff-friendly language. So we're really excited about this. I think this is going to be a model not only for ADUs, but certainly even the mixed-use zoning code that was just discussed this evening. Also wanted to introduce the Residential Design Standards Code Amendment. This is essentially a significant rewrite of sorts of our zoning code, at least on the residential side. When we adopted the 1923 efforts, we knew that there was some language and elements of the code that were going to need to be updated as well. We also received some encouragement and recommendations from our development community on what some of those changes could be. And so we're certainly happy that elements of this code amendment are supported by the development community. Again, the intent is to offer a variety of living housing choices, variety in site and building design, and the increase in design standard simplicity. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in November. It's roughly 80 to 100 pages. As I've learned from other communities, that the earlier in our growth spurts of sorts that we can update our zoning code, the better off we will be. The city of Boise, for example, right now is working on their first update to their zoning code since 1966, and it's roughly 600 pages. And so it's much better for us to do it now than wait 30 or 40 years when our, hopefully, code is not that long. But in essence, though, what this code begins to do in Pasco, at least, is get us more to a hybrid zoning code where it's part form-based, so regulating the form, and also part regulatory in terms of the uses, et cetera, which is it's going to be, I think, a great value that sort of future-proofs our zoning code in the future. Of course, we're working on our housing action and implementation plan. The city of Pasco is one of several communities across the state that applied for and received funding to develop our very first comprehensive housing action plan. There's several elements of it. We are currently in the middle of really all of these. We held a great stakeholder workshop in December. We had representatives from, I think, almost all of the housing stakeholder communities that we would want to see, including nonprofit, private advocacy organization, public health, public transportation, the development community, realtors, et cetera. There is one area where we need to increase engagement, and that's certainly with our large employers, and we'll be looking to increase the amount of input and engagement we work with our large employers as we get ready for the second stakeholder workshop in May. We're also preparing to release a public survey that we intend to get out into the community for their input by the end of this week. The housing action plan will certainly be supplemented by the work done by the NYU team regarding the anti-displacement policies. So we've done a lot on housing over the last several years, and we've been rewarded by being asked to do a lot of presentations over the last 12 to 18 months. Next month in May, staff will be presenting with the Municipal Research Service Center on what we did for ADUs to encourage more ADUs in the community. We've been providing a lot of input and have presented with the Association of Washington Cities. In fact, we were a recipient of one of their awards last summer. A lot of local chambers and organization presentations just explaining and sharing with the community with what we've done. Presentations with the American Planning Association, with the Lieutenant Governor Danny Heck last summer, and then even an opportunity to go brag about the work we're doing in Southern California, which was pretty exciting. So City Pasco certainly, I think, is, from a staff perspective, becoming more comfortable with being a leader in housing initiatives, and we look forward to driving that mission further as we proceed in the future. So on the transportation side, certainly staff, again, providing the long language from the RCWs and certainly the reference to the City Council goals regarding the completion of our first ever transportation master plan last fall, and the updates to the development design standards with regards to connectivity, walkability, sustainability, et cetera. So again, similar format on the regulatory side. Over the last several years, we really only had one regulation, and that was the requirement in 2019 that all residential neighborhoods developments be required to provide the construction of curb gutter sidewalk, basically sidewalks. It wasn't until that code was adopted in early 2020 that I believe all of our RS zones, so the larger zoning areas, lot areas, sidewalks were an option, and that was an option, unfortunately, that wasn't always developed. And so we have numerous neighborhoods in the city of Pasco, particularly close to neighborhood parks, schools, high schools, et cetera, where there are no sidewalks. Fortunately, now new developments in the city of Pasco will all be required to have sidewalks. That's a benefit to our community members, certainly. Obviously, a pending initiative associated with street connectivity. On the planning side, a 2011 bike ped master plan that had a lot of language and encouraging recommendations, et cetera, that were mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, there was no regulatory constraint to require those goals and objectives of that bike ped plan. And in a similar manner as the 2022 Transportation System Master Plan, our first ever comprehensive master plan on transportation that identified several deficiencies in our transportation system, the gaps in walkability and accessibility, provision for emergency services, et cetera, gaps in funding, for example, based on all the projects at least developed at the time of that master plan, there's roughly a $293 million shortfall in the projects that are necessary to accommodate all of the growth and the funds we have available via various sources to complete those projects. We also have several policies. Obviously, city council goals that date back to about 2010 or so have had a significant focus on transportation. They started with Road 68. They've evolved to broader and more specific in ways objectives for achieving better transportation planning in the city of Pasco. We have a codified policy regarding complete streets. That's in Title 12 of the Municipal Code, which essentially is a series of encouraging language about what we would like to see in new development. But as mentioned earlier tonight, those are all languages that point to encourage. We encourage development to incorporate complete streets policies, but as we get told many times in the development review process, we cannot require what we don't require. So we hear that quite a bit. And even the relevant policy regarding greenhouse gas emissions and several others all point to increasing transportation connectivity, et cetera. So regarding implementation progress, we're a little bit certainly more behind. We're definitely behind on the transportation implementation side. We got a complete streets policy that, again, the language encourages but lacks the regulatory framework to require these in the design and planning of new developments. And then at least we have a requirement that ensures that new residential neighborhoods in the city of Pasco will be provided with adequate sidewalks, et cetera. So also want to focus that we've had a pending code amendment in Lowell since December of 2019. This is a street connectivity effort that this council certainly is well aware of and presented to this council and planning commission dozens of times over the last several years. Initiated by staff in 2019, intended to implement established policies and best practices, addresses community input on access, safety, and walkability, and is supported by a wide variety of stakeholders. This effort was reinitiated last fall. Was staff recommendation back to the Planning Commission in the fall to recommend a slightly revised version of it. And the Planning Commission recommended denial and asked for committees to be set up to discuss with stakeholder communities to further vet the proposed recommendations. I do want to point out that since January of 2020, the City of Pasco's hearing examiner has approved roughly 1,500 residential lots, and we've got roughly 800 or so lots that are going through the current hearing examiner process. So since the initiation of this effort, there's been roughly 2,500 new residential units that will not have connectivity standards in place by the time they're constructed. Staff, again, certainly acknowledges that with any policy recommendation that there's benefits and potential impacts. Just wanted to acknowledge that we understand that there may be potential the idea of new regulations are never viewed upon favorably for the most part, and even the potential for costs associated with those new regulations are certainly not a good news for staff to break down to anybody. But we do want to, again, emphasize the benefits associated with ensuring that future residents in the city of Pasco have an adequate transportation system to facilitate their daily trips, work trips, school trips, et cetera. So I was trying to find a clip art that best showed an imbalance between what we're doing on housing and transportation. And I want to point out that the more housing updates that we're working on, it's intended to update our code to be aligned with best practices and also future-proof of, and certainly just provide an opportunity for residents to have adequate housing opportunities in the city of Pasco. But then further and further and further we get along the housing implementation side, it becomes more evident from the staff side that we're coming more and more behind on being proactive about transportation planning. So we just wanted to point out that there certainly is an obvious mismatch, and eventually the cost of infrastructure associated with these new developments, particularly in the urban growth area, are beginning to become extremely costly, cumbersome during the development review process, adding time, adding cost, et cetera. And in many cases, they may be so costly that the development will not be able to occur because the cost of mitigation is just too high. And so we just wanted to point that out to this body and again, acknowledge that the housing work that we're working on with several community collaborators, et cetera, are being done to meet a necessary need and to prevent us from having the challenges that other communities have. But we certainly have a mismatch in the implementations of both the transportation as it relates to housing. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions I can for council this evening on where we're at with implementation of housing and transportation element of the comp plan. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you again, Mr. Gonzalez, for your presentation. I appreciate the clip art. Councilman Campos.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Gonzalez, so, you know, on the table and on your last chart, you mentioned that in 2018, this council passed ordinance 4425 for single room occupancy housing. It was discussed that we as the council would get an update hopefully on being able to lift the moratorium that's not mentioned up here. I'm not asking for any, you know, clear-cut answer, but are we close to getting that answer?
I think so. I think we wanted to, certainly all housing types, including SROs, are considered in the housing action plan. I think preliminary staff evaluation of SROs is that I think our zoning, our regulations on SROs need to be refined and enhanced so that we get the intended result out of them. But SROs are a benefit to the toolkit in the city of Pasco, and I think there's obvious concerns about SROs and the market not actually being affordable. But I think it's probably important to compare that we don't have a mandatory affordable housing in the city of Pasco. Other communities do, and they found that to be more problematic because there's usually a fee and lieu program, and it's cheaper to pay the fee than to just provide the housing at a lower market level. So I think when we come back more with the housing action plan, it is likely that we're going to provide some recommendations that revise and alter the current provisions associated with SROs.
Excellent. I just want to state my personal opinion that if the SRO comes back to us beforehand, regardless of whether we're at in the action plan, I'm inclined to lift the moratorium regardless of what the housing action says. Again, you know, we put a lot of thought and effort into it in a toolkit. There's not a huge need for it, and I just would like to stop burdening staff with having to monitor that moratorium and having it keep coming back to refresh. It's not doing anybody any good while it's sitting in the moratorium. So, you know, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for your presentation. Very thorough. I'm on the same mind as you. I'd like to see and discuss more transportation items. Hopefully, you know, throughout the rest of the year, we can see a few more come our way.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Just briefly, I do want to congratulate you and others in the CED for all the work on the housing and I mean when we look at that, you know, that's a lot of items. I mean, that's actually, but when you look at the scale of change to the city, and we really are cutting edge on this, at least as cutting edge as people get in Washington. And, you know, I think that is something that's being recognized, and I certainly applaud you and others on all the proactive work to try to get ahead of this as best we can. The kudos and the accolades we've gotten are well deserved. So lots of meat in here, and lots more that we're going to have to, as a council, continue to wrestle with, and appreciate staff's continuing to your hard work and innovation on bringing this stuff forward. So thank you.
Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, again, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for your presentation and for thorough presentation. And staff, thank you again. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda. Resolution Lewis Street Overpass Change Orders, and Director Worley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation, kind of give you an update on what's going on with the Lewis Street Overpass project. And tonight we have our consultant, senior engineer, our project manager, Michael Ullman. He works for HLA Consultants, and he's been on this project since, well, for a very long time. So he's very knowledgeable and can answer any questions you might have. So, Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Worley. It's nicer than usually are to me, so I appreciate that. Council, Mayor, thank you guys very much for having me tonight. Here to give you guys just a little update on the project. We're talking about some change orders and then also just kind of a general project update. So Lewis Street Overpass. What does the project do? It replaces the structurally deficient Lewis Street underpass. The new overpass, as you guys are obviously aware, is directly north of the existing underpass. There's some neat project elements. It's a 625-foot bridge. It's a big bridge. It's got over a mile of girders supporting it and over 900,000 pounds of rebar that's been installed. There's also a 70-foot bridge that's going to be over First Avenue. It's currently built. You can drive underneath it. There'll be 55,000 square feet of walls built, about 40,000 yards of backfill for those walls, another 35,000 yards of material brought in as just common borrow to fill up some of the voids, about 4,000 tons of asphalt, hot mix asphalt, and about 6,500 square yards of sidewalk. It's a big project. So here's an artist rendering, the top from prior to construction, and then a picture that was taken by the project team in February of 2023, so just about a month and a half ago. It's cool to see progress happening, and for an artist rendering, actually does a pretty good job capturing it. So again, on the left is the bridge being built, and I've got just a few pictures here showing you some of the progress. That was standing on the first pier looking to the south, so I'll give you an idea of what you'll be able to see off of the bridge after it's completed. The picture on the left here is the rebar that is installed on the First Avenue bridge, and then some of those 55,000 square feet of walls are pictured on the right. And here's some pictures actually from last week. While on site, we poured the First Avenue bridge, so the deck has actually been poured on that. So some great progress, and here's just a couple pictures on the left. That's the finishing process for bridge decks, and then on the right is the pump truck getting some of that material into place. So a little quick discussion on the schedule of the project. Groundbreaking ceremony, as some of you may recall, was back on June 4th, 2021. Contract actually began on August 30th, 2021 for the 400 working days. A little bit of lag there just for material procurement and things like that. The plan currently is for the bridge to open in August of 2023. Continue to work through some various issues on the project, but we believe that'll be a firm date for opening. The substantial completion date of the project will not be until April of 24. So once the new bridge is open, there's quite a bit of work to do. That'll include the underpass demolition and a variety of items just on the adjacent streets. As noted there, the underpass demolition, there's some items to be determined with that with the railroad. We'll discuss that very briefly today. So change orders 1 through 11 have already been through council, previously approved. The total of that, $652,936.17. Today, bringing before you change orders 12 through 17. The amount of those is $58,892.60. Considering the time we are currently at, are there any specific questions on any of the change orders that I can answer for council? There should be a description in your packet on each one of those items.
Does anybody have any questions?
Okay,
None now.
we'll keep moving.
Thank you.
A brief budget discussion. So the original contract value was $22,344,999.88. You can see the approved change orders. That corresponds with numbers 1 through 11 that have already been approved by council. The proposed change orders today, 12 through 17, which brings the proposed contract total to just over $23 million. Included in the original project was a construction contingency of 5%. And those are the bottom numbers, so $1,125,900. Considering the change orders and the consultant contract supplements that have been executed to date, there's not much contingency remaining, approximately $22,000 rounded. So that is something I just want council to be aware of. As more changes come up, you can anticipate on seeing some budget amendments and things like that come through related to the project. So on Lewis Street Overpass, it's a challenging project. It's a large, complex structure, and it's built in a very old area of Pasco. When you dig in the ground in very old areas, occasionally you'll find some interesting things, and this project has been the recipient of that in several locations. There are a variety of large unresolved issues. I'm not going to get into details on them today. Certainly ask any questions you want, but just want council to be aware of some of the magnitude of issues that we are facing on the project. The project team is actively working on these. None of these are agreed to, but these are dollar amounts that have been submitted by the contractor or that are projected by the project team. One of the big issues, the biggest, is an SEW wall revision. This specific item is related to those 55,000 square feet of wall panels, and there's a claim by the contractor indicating there are design issues associated with it. The magnitude of that issue is $2.7 million. The second issue is related to schedule impacts associated with building foundations. As you all may be aware, the original project had a couplet system using one bridge at Lewis, one at Clark. When that was redesigned and to its current location, the city had put out a contract that took out some of the existing structures around 2013. The basements of those structures were not removed because the original concept did not anticipate having a structure there. When that was moved to save funds on the project, those foundations, I guess, still existed. Those weren't included in the plans, and so those are issues that the project is working through. We think we're near resolution with that specific item, and as soon as the next workshop, you may be seeing some information specific to that item. Issue number 3 is the underpass removal. BNSF sprung this on us about 2 months ago that they anticipate their cost to be very significant related to the underpass removal, to the tune of about $1.5 million, plus the actual removal by the city. So we continue to work with BNSF on that, and we think there's some mitigation strategies to drop those costs. And issue number 4 is just related to the items above. As the length of a contract goes on, the consultants that are out there for construction management, engineering support, things like that, extend on, and those are typically hour-based contracts. So we project all of those could be upwards of $1 million on the project. Noted at the bottom, the contractor is arguing that many of these items are design issues, and we don't necessarily agree with all those assessments, but we are actively engaging with the contractor to work out a variety of these issues. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions you may have.
Councilman Campos.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much for the detailed overview of the project. One thing that I'm curious about is, what does your craft mix look like right now? What level of apprentices are you currently using? From a philosophical point, I think it's awesome. You know, when people are learning trades, you have an opportunity to better your community. So I want to know roughly what you're thinking craft-wise you're using for apprentices.
So with a project like this, there is a set requirement by the state. There's state funding involved with the project, and the apprentice goal on the project is, going off memory, but I think it's about 4% of the total hours on the project. And with that, the city can't dictate necessarily what a contractor does. We can hold them certainly to goals that we have on the project.
Okay.
But any of these contractors are typically looking for apprentices, and that's been something that's that we've heard that's been hard for them to find on these projects, finding appropriate trade people. And there's a shortage of people that are looking to do very physical manual labor jobs. But they continue to work with the AGC and some of the other trade organizations to bring as many people in as they can.
Okay, so you're thinking on a bridge like this, you've got iron workers, cement masons, carpenters, and you're saying that they've got 4% of the total man hours, they've got those apprentices on there. Am I missing a craft that you can think of off the top of your head? General laborers, pipe fitters.
Yeah, laborers, carpenters, iron workers. Typically, you wouldn't get into cement masons for this type of work where you're forming up walls and things like that. That typically falls into bridge carpenter work.
Okay.
But those would be the primary ones.
Okay.
And operators for sure as well.
Right. Okay. No, just again, that's a huge chunk of work that's being done that people are learning trades, and it's really enticing. Those are good working jobs, and something that you'll never, once you learn it, people can never take that away from you. So, thanks for providing that feedback.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Any further questions? Councilman Serrano?
I know the last slide was probably the one that you expected us to have the most questions on.
Sure.
So I'm going to go to those. We're talking about almost $6 million of unresolved on a $22 million and change budgeted project. I realize that this one's got its own issues. What do we anticipate, given the way things are moving with both the contractor and the engineer, the design engineer? Are we going to be able to resolve these? To not delay any of the work, and B, in a way that we're not going to end up paying, too close to that $6 million. And again, you might be crystal ball in there. If I'm getting too far ahead of it, that's fine.
If we could not talk about that in the open session, I'd appreciate it.
Fair enough.
Executive session.
We'll
Probably
leave that question to our legal counsel for another day.
And Mr. Worley is well versed on these items as well. So.
Okay. Well, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you for your presentation. Any further questions or comments? Thank you again.
Thank you for your time, council.
With that, we're going through our agenda pretty quick. Next item on the agenda, item 6, miscellaneous council discussion. Interim city manager and Director Ratkai.
I was going to turn it over to Director Ratkai, so thank you.
Okay. Yeah, a couple of great Parks and Rec events. One happened last weekend and one's coming up this week. We had over 2,000 people attend the Spring Egg Extravaganza. Said it right. I had to slow down a little bit. That was our event out at the softball complex. The organization that helped us put on the event was expecting about 200 people, and staff warned them that this is a really popular event, and sure enough, we estimate just around 2,000 people and kids came to show up and participate, and it's always a fun one to put on. Arbor Day is this Wednesday, April 12th at 10 a.m. We're having an event at Kurtzman Park at 331 South Weehee here in Pasco, obviously. And we want everyone to come out and participate in this great event for Arbor Day. So Wednesday at 10 a.m. in Kurtzman Park. That's all.
Councilman Campos.
Make mine super brief. April 15th is the start of turkey season, so if anybody needs me on weekends, I'll be slow to respond, but I'll get back to you.
Eventually. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question for Director Ratkai. We had a commitment about changing the animal control.
Yes.
And opening up to a larger public audience. Has that gone out to the public in a in a way that that it's very clear that everyone when that meeting is?
Yeah, we're finalizing the agenda. I was out of town last week on vacation for spring break, like many of us. So worked with Animal Services Manager Ben Ziggin to finalize our agenda. We should have that published and out available and to the public probably tomorrow. And the meeting will be April 13th at 5:30 p.m. in this room, Pasco City Council chambers for those listening.
And April 13th is this Thursday,
Yes, sir.
to be very clear. Excellent, thank you. That's all I had.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, Chief Roski's favorite, executive session. We do have a need for executive session. Discussion with legal counsel about current or potential litigation per RCW 42.30.1101I and qualifications of an applicant for public employment per RCW 42.30.1101G. We will be meeting for 20 minutes to return. I want to say 20 minutes. Hopefully we can stick to the 20 minutes to return at 8:51. Thank you. It is 8:51. We do have a need to extend our executive session for another 20 minutes to return at 9:10. Thank you. It is now 9:10, and with no further items on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.